want to start with questions out here, or do y'all want to start? Go ahead. I figured y'all would. I thought I'd let them respond and then take questions, but that's okay.
You mentioned before about the transfer credit, making sure the collaboration needs that they were not regionally accredited. In the state of Georgia, with all the technical schools coming on board, the primary one would be Lanier Tech. How, if they just got approval for SACS COC, all the classes beforehand, I would not normally take as a registrar. So do you have to know when that school got regionally accredited?
If that is your policy, yes. If your policy is that you'll only accept credits from regional accredited institutions, and again, I don't think that's a good policy, but if that's your policy, then we have a membership directory which has the initial membership date. However, be aware that that is very confusing at times, because anytime a merger takes place and a new institution is created, that date gets reset. So you may have to call our offices and ask sometimes, and we can look up in our database and we can see that indeed if you had credits from the University of Tennessee that were back in the 1970s, they're good credits. They were SACS accredited, but our membership date for University of Tennessee is going to be like 1998 or something like that, and they've been around a whole lot longer than that. So you have to be a little bit careful, and especially since we're dealing with a lot of mergers, of knowing that.
But if I wanted to go back and look at that transfer credit, I would have to go back to that school, is what you're saying, in order to verify that the teachers who taught it had the right credentials?
Well, it's not just a matter of credentials, it's course content. It's you know, sometimes, I know what our registrar used to do if they were taking credits from, sometimes from SACS accredited schools, I might add, and there was a question of whether or not they should take the credit. They would ask to get a syllabus. They would ask that maybe some credentials on the faculty, but the course content's as important as the syllabus. See, we don't have that 18-hour rule anymore, a master's in 18, so if you find out that the professor has this degree or that degree, they may or may not have been SACS qualified. So you know, that's sort of, you need to do due diligence, but you probably don't need to kill yourself over it, you know, kind of a thing. There's a difference there, but between you know, you need to do all that's appropriate to try to find out whether those credits should be accepted. But you know, y'all probably get transcripts from, what is it, Columbia Southern from time to time, which is one of the DTech schools that does a lot of work for the military. You know, that you just need to check to say, okay, is this an appropriate course? We have a position statement on our website, which may be useful to look at. And I don't have, I'm not wired into the web over there, so I can't go to it. But go to our website and look under policies and publications on our website. And if you look through that, I'm pretty sure it's called a position statement, which talks about transcripting of credits. And what it is a joint statement that was approved many years ago, but it's still accurate. All the regional accreditors, and I think maybe perhaps all the CHIA accredited institutions may have agreed on this particular statement that talks about good practices and transcripting of credit. That may be a good thing to look at. Okay. Should I take another question or let y'all go?
I've been given marching orders to sort of get the panel moving, and so I'm going to take my marching orders. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for coming, Dr. Johnson. You said, I have to tell you, you help us when we see you in events like this. When I say you, I mean SACS. In events like this and not arriving on our campuses for. So this is helpful, and we are appreciative to have this time with you. I'm going to start my question somewhat from a system perspective, because that's where I sit. One of the things that we want to make sure we're doing at the system level is that we are setting our policies and our procedures in a way that encourage and make collaborations and consortiums easier or functional within us. Do you have any words of advice of what I might need to be doing and what the system office should be doing along that line?
Good question. Let me see if I can come up with a couple. I can look at both what some systems are doing and what some systems aren't. One thing that systems are doing is in terms of new program approval, new site approval, things like that is structuring some of their internal documents so that they mirror, at least in some ways, part of the questions that we ask in our prospectus for substantive change. And North Carolina, at least it comes to mind, that did this pretty well for a while. I presume they're still doing it. So that to some extent the institution could simply turn around what they've submitted to the state and take care of most of what they need to submit to us in that kind of a process. That would be one suggestion. My guess is you're already doing a good bit of that, but that would be one thing that I would recommend. The other thing is remind your institutions over and over and over again, if the system office has approved this programmatic change, that they still might need our approval. Or they might need to notify us, and that notification needs to come from the institutions, not from the system office. We have one system office that is really good. At any time they make changes at the system level, they send us this large missive of 60 changes that are taking place across the 52 colleges in the system or whatever it is. And we very politely write back and say, thank you very much, we'll put this in our files. Please tell your institutions that each of them has an obligation to report changes to us. And so, just keep reinforcing that if you would. Those are the two main things that come to mind. The other thing that is important, we do have some standards, and I don't recall this having been a real big issue in Georgia. Okay, so I think that y'all probably have processes in place that work pretty well. But we do have several standards that speak in terms of the institution does this, the institution does that, or the institution's faculty approves or something like that. The extent to which systems become more centralized so that the impression can be given sometimes that the system has made policies and imposed them on the institution of things that are historically the prerogative of faculty, quote, make it clear that the faculty from across the state do serve on committees and do have input, and that particular institution has input into a curriculum review process or something like that if you're doing a standardized curriculum across the state. And it will say, and make sure the schools believe that, because if they believe that, they'll tell us that. If they think you're forcing them to do things, they sometimes tell us that in systems, and it comes across that way in the wording of documentation. There is one other thing you might want to do at the system level. There is a standard, it's on reaffirmation of accreditation, it's a policy, excuse me. There's a reaffirmation of accreditation policy that says that if a school is part of a system, part of what it must provide with its reaffirmation materials is an explanation of the relationship between the institution and the system. We have one state, Kentucky comes to mind, KCTCS publishes like a 200, I don't think it needs to be that big, this huge book that they send to all the schools and then suggest to the schools, you need to send that along with your SACS submission. They sometimes do, they sometimes don't. But you might want to help the schools by having some standardization of some of that information. For example, one area where it comes up in Georgia all the time, where some consistency in presentation, I'm not saying identical, but consistency in presentation might help, is in the area of governance. Because all of y'all have the same governing board. Okay, and we have standards that pertain to the governing board and conflict of interest and things like that. The system can help the schools going through reaffirmation by ensuring that they are providing all the information that the institutions need to address those standards. For example, the conflict of interest requirement, that you have a conflict of interest policy, where there's a published policy that's system-wide. But what committees also want to see is if you've got a form that everyone fills out on the board declaring a conflicts of interest or something like that, and that's part of the policy, the committees want to see that. Well, the best place to get that information is probably to have the system send it to them as part of preparing for reaffirmation and saying, you want to put this in your response to standard 2.2, or you want to put this in your response to standard 3.2.3, or whatever that standard is, to help them out so that you don't have one of these anomalies, especially at an offsite where you might have 3 system schools in the same cluster going through at the same time, where 2 of the schools are found in compliance on something and the third one's not, because the third one didn't include some information that was relevant. And you know, it's the institution's responsibility to do that. So that may be something that you could do as well.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I wanted to just ask for some clarification about our consortium, because particularly as it applies to the at least 25% rule that you have to have at your institution, as we're talking about expanding access and opportunities for adult learners and military personnel particularly, part of the excitement about that was that as a group we could offer enough alternatives that they would be able to complete a program without having to be physically present. And for example, those of us who are participants in E-Core, you can get your entire core curriculum without having to take it on our campus. And then if you wanted to transition into a degree program that we were developing together, you could take your whole program with various people all over the system offering courses. It seems like this is not going to allow us to do that.
Well, you can do that if you want to change and have the system become the accredited institution and everyone becomes a branch campus. I mean, it is a legitimate way. Now deciding which football team you're going to have is going to be a tough one.
There you go.
Okay, but I'm being a little bit facetious there. But if a system becomes too much one institution, then it ought to be accredited as one institution. We have this with community colleges in some of our states, where we have some community colleges in large cities, and well, I'll mention the state, in Texas. You go to Texas and you look at the community college, there isn't a system. There are lots of systems in Texas. And if you look at some of our, if you go to Dallas, the Dallas Community College system, each institution is separately accredited. You go to Houston and you look at the community college system, there is a single, there's only one accreditation for the Houston system, even though they have tons of campuses. I mean, that is one, seriously, it is one way to deal with that. The other way is to consider perhaps there is a E-University that needs to be created within Georgia that is an accredited institution. Freestanding, gets its own accreditation. It's got to be able to offer a degree. You can't be an accredited institution without offering a degree. But that's another potential solution, is that you create a branch campus of one of your existing institutes. By the way, that's the best way. Gwinnett aside, and I'm very proud of the folks at Gwinnett College, by the way, but they took the hard way. I mean, they sought accreditation from scratch, and it took them longer because of that than if they had been a branch campus of someone that had been spun off with separate accreditation. So you can either seek separate accreditation from scratch for an e-college or an e-university, or you can spin one off from an existing institution as a clearinghouse spot where you can feel pretty sure you're going to hit those 25% and 34% targets, or find a way to deal with the adjunct instructor situation, where you can create adjunct instructors for the degree granting institution. It doesn't say which 25%, by the way. It's 25%. Some of the other regionals, and in fact we used to, if you look at the old criteria, there were numbers pertaining to the whole degree, but there were also numbers pertaining to the major. A certain amount of the major had to be taken from the degree granting institution. That's not the way the standard currently reads. It says 25% of the degree. So 25% of a 120-hour degree might all be in gen ed. But it won't be for the transfer student probably, and so you do need to look at that. I know that that's going to be the biggest issue that these standards present to y'all, and if you think it needs clarification, to the extent to which the policies come along that supersede or change the principles, you need to get that in the next principles revision to make sure that that change is reflected. So save the dates. But I'm not saying telling me is I'm giving you advice here. You need to tell your state representatives who are on the SACS board, who have input when the SACS meets, about the issues if the wording has created a problem, talk to them about it, because the membership changes the standards. My job is to help enforce them, not to change them, and to serve as a liaison and explain them. But I don't play any role in changing our standards. In fact, it's pretty close to a conflict of interest if I do that. So you want to work through our membership, and a lot of our membership's in Georgia. You can go to our website and find out who all your state reps are on that. But the wording clearly has changed in that standard, and in a way that I can see can create some hardship for y'all.
So basically, we should stop working toward what we were working toward.
No. I think y'all can find ways to do exactly what you wanted to do and be in compliance with that standard. I really do.
But in a different way. I guess I'm just saying we have to sort of backtrack and look at a different
It may be in a different way if what you're going to do is create a credentialing process where someone can earn a degree just by mixing and matching any credits that they get. The question is, who is ensuring that student is receiving an appropriately quality education and ensuring the integrity of that degree? And your answer is going to be the system, but we don't accredit the system. And that's the rub there.
As a representative of ECOR, I find your proposition pretty interesting, but it sort of goes back to the question of how do you define a course originating from a certain school? Do you mean that, for example, with your question, do all of the teachers from which her students take their courses have to be employed at Dalton?
I think that the employment of the instructor is a pretty clear indication.
Right, but what about,
that.
I mean, they attracted the student, they recruited the student, they admitted the student.
No, I don't think that's what the standard is asking about. I think the standard is asking about control of the delivery of the course. The content of the course, the evaluation of the faculty, the appropriate qualifications of the faculty, oversight of the course and the curriculum. And under our policies, those are institutional prerogatives, and they're driven by the institution. So those are the things. The other systems that have statewide, they may have home and host or something like that, kind of a situation. And there's a home school for the student, but there's a host school for the delivery of the course. I'm talking about the host school for the delivery of the course, I think has to meet the 25%.
Now, in the development of the ECOR classes, they were collaboratively developed by faculty from multiple institutions along with instructional designers. And the Gen Ed committee, is that right, Dr. Crafton, has oversight, and they work together with the ECOR subcommittee. They do review the courses, the quality, the learning outcomes, the assessments. So even though really the USG only works as sort of a facilitator or administrator, each one of the affiliates has a place at the table, and they are involved in the development and oversight and the hiring of the faculty at their institution, but not necessarily at others, so that could be a problem.
Yeah, I think that's where the problem. Now, let me clarify. I don't make any of these decisions. You know, when a committee reviews one of your institutions, a staff member just helps read what the standards are and helps with interpretation of them. But it's peer committees that make all these decisions. You need to be aware of that. So I can't guess how a peer institution, peer committee members are going to respond when they're presented with the way it works in Georgia. They may say, fine. They may not see an issue. They may see an issue. They may see an issue at one school and not an issue at another school because of how it's presented. But I am just reading what the standard says, and I'll reread what I had on the slide. The member must, this is when evaluating, accepting, and transcripting credits awarded through collaborative academic arrangements. The member institution must record on the academic transcript the name of the institution from which a course is taken. If a member institution desires to transcript as its own a course taken through a partner institution, I think this is what you're talking about, right. It must be able to demonstrate that the instruction was accomplished under the member's own supervision and included approval of the academic qualifications of each instructor in advance and the regular evaluation of the effectiveness of each instructor. It's pretty clearly, I think, the way that's worded is ruling out the recruitment of the student. It's talking about the instruction being delivered to the student.
Right.
So.
Yeah. But, okay.
Okay.
I won't argue with you. That wouldn't be a good political move.
I would. Well, I've got real thick skin, and I always forget everything. When I'm doing advice with people, when I walk out of the door, I usually forget everything I've heard. So that's, or at least try to. We have a question over here first, and then.
Along that same line, I mean, I think ECOR probably isn't going to be that much of a problem. We were talking about, getting a central repository of the faculty credentials, that all of the member institutions that are in fact teaching ECOR, we can have that on file. I don't really think that's going to be that big of a deal. I have a little bigger deal because Southern Poly has a consortial agreement with the TCSG whole institution, okay, that was signed, what were we talking, 3 years ago, Dave? 2009. And we basically, again, we're trying to wrestle with the same problem someone mentioned, such as Lanier Tech, who is now going up with COC accreditation, et cetera, but they were not accredited before. But we looked at all of the programs, we looked at the faculty, even at the time we set up the agreement. Mm-hmm. What we're wrestling with right now is, well, what if though back a student transfers in and they have courses back 2003, 2001, et cetera, then what do we do? Right now we're talking about, because I'm in charge of one of those articulations for my IT program, is that I actually have to approve those courses and the faculty. And so, I mean, I get the information and then we're going to keep a letter on file, at our registrar's office that says, I looked at it. Mm-hmm. Now, that comes down a lot on me. Now, I'm a SACS liaison too, but so I'm kind of doing double duty. But the fact of the matter is, we're basically saying a faculty member has approved that.
Right.
One that knows the courses. So.
And I think if you look at that position statement I talked about, it talks about doing those kinds of things in terms of good practice to do that. And what you're saying is post the articulation agreement, except for periodic going back and re-reviewing, which there is an expectation I think you would do, that what you've done is you have already looked at what's being offered and reached a sound academic reason for doing what you're doing. Pre-articulation, you don't have that in place, and so you're treating them on a case-by-case basis, and but you're following good practice in doing that. That sounds perfectly reasonable to me. I mean, not my call to make again, but that sounds perfectly reasonable to me.
Back to your statement about the member must exercise academic oversight over the content, the curriculum, the faculty. Are there examples of consortial agreements where that has been successfully done and SACS has reviewed those programs?
Well, the new 25% 1/3 requirements are new, so there aren't any since that rewording took place just this past December. But yes, there have been systems where there have been reviews done by SACS of distance education consortia as a whole that then pertain to every system that chose to be part of the review. Sometimes They opted out of that review because they already had approval for distance education and didn't need new approval because of the statewide system. That was done with Virtual College of Texas, for example, although it's hardly live anymore, I think, but that was one that went through. In the case of what used to be called Kentucky Virtual University, which again no longer exists, there was a review, but the determination there was made that those would have to be handled on a case-by-case statement. As each school went through reaffirmation, there would be re-review of that relationship. Virtual College of Texas, I think, did something very similar to what was being talked about here in terms of the database for the faculty and having access to that by the home institution, not the one who was originating the course, but the one whose student was taking the course. And probably it's pretty easy to move from that kind of oversight to being able to book the course and argue it's your own course because you have the oversight. Now notice if you do that and you go through reaffirmation and you're booking that course as your own course, the faculty member's credentials need to be on your faculty roster as part of your reaffirmation materials because they were in fact an adjunct faculty member for you that semester. But I think there are ways to do it, and those are the only ones that come to my mind right away. Other questions from the panel? Or anything about things I didn't talk about? Other SACS stuff? There's lots more in here.
Right there. Yes, ma'am.
I guess what I need to clarify is, are you booking them as your own credits, or are you booking them as transfer of credit?
They're coming in with transfer credits instead of an A and an AT, they have transfer credit.
Okay, but it is not being treated as your course, even though it's originating abroad.
No, it's just brought
Okay.
equivalent.
Okay. Then you put the same safeguards in place as you would with any other transfer of credit in those cases, especially if you're transferring in from an institution that's not accredited. You might use one of the translation companies or some of the other third parties to help you with that. You may have your own skills in-house to be able to do that. But I think that's a long-standing practice of being able to accept and transfer and or take whole degrees. You can have a student who's applying to a graduate program from a foreign institution. On what basis do you accept the degree? You've got the same issue there where you just have to verify. You have obligations to verify, but if you do verify and you're satisfied, then you're able to put the transfer information on your transcript. In terms of course substitution, whether or not it substitutes exactly for one of your own courses, that's to a large extent your internal decision to make. Is it elective credit or is it credit for a very close course? And I don't think that we're going to get down to that level of micromanaging. Our committees hardly ever would get to that level. But if you're doing international agreements and there are degrees involved, either dual degrees or joint degrees, you do need to pay special attention to this policy because there are special things in this collaborative academic arrangements policies for those cases. And I'll tell you right now, given the news of the last month, the only thing that's going to happen in the area of international consortium relationships is more scrutiny. I don't know if you all followed the Dickinson State University situation or the Empire State College situation, but both of those are going to lead to no way around it. There's going to be more scrutiny of international consortium relationships.
There's been talk about trying to verify credentials of the people talking to more work with some foreign institutions or governments, that's not impossible.
Well, we've had problems, and see when you're transferring, you're even further removed in terms of control in doing that than when you're entering into an actual partnership with an institution and they're teaching courses for you, and then you're booking them as your own. We've had some institutions in the southern region that have run into some issues with some of their foreign operations where they have lost some control. Not the extent to which we were reading about with Empire State, but they've had their hands slapped through our processes to clean that up. And so it is something that you do have to pay attention to in those cases, because you're certifying that course as being of your standard. You're saying it meets your standards when you put it on your transcript, and so you have obligations to make sure that it really is meeting your standards. Yes, sir.
Okay, when you get to the military side of the house, I want a clarification on the 25%. Say, it's all online in this regard that I've got core classes and then I've got degree program classes. Is that 25% be a combination of, or is it actually 25% in one particular area but not shared between both?
The standard does not make a distinction. The standard says, and let me make sure I quote it correctly here. At least 25% of the course hours, wrong standard, at least 25% of the credit hours required for the degree. So if the degree is a baccalaureate, then at least 25% of at least 120 hours has to come from. It doesn't stipulate whether it's general education, whether it's general elective, whether it's major. The standard does not stipulate. Now, you may have internal policies, and many times schools do have internal policies that are different from the standard. It's very common to see colleges have standards that say at least 50% of the major must be taken at the institution. That's very, very common, but it's not our standard.
But, so in order to try to meet the question asked about our military students that are scattered all over the place, coming in from various sides of the house, and they're trying to do it through an online type distance learning, however you want to look at it. If the granting institution has 25% of the combination, then as long as we're meeting the due diligence on the other faculty or the course curriculum being pulled in, SACS audit would say that degree granted to that soldier, that service member, then would be worthy of the credit, and under the audit that would come in, would be safe.
Yeah, you meet the standard, and you're going to self-audit on this. You're going to have your own safeguards in place to ensure it, but what you're describing would be consistent with the standard, as my reading of the standard would say, because it doesn't make a distinction. It says 25% of the credit hours in the degree, period.
As the consortium, we could find shortfalls and work with other member institutions to pull their classwork in. So through academic advising, we could say, here's what you need to take from us to ensure the 25%, because it is online. And we know we don't have to definitely need another program. Then working with other academic institutions, then we can put together degree plans and work with that student to say, Georgia Southern or Georgia State has this program, you can get these two from there. You know, Georgia Perimeter has these four, you can get it from them. Only 25% is that, and everything else.
Right, as long as 25% is met, doesn't matter where the rest. Yeah, it only matters in the extent to which you have systems in place to ensure that the consortium itself maintains the standards as part of the consortium. But each institution has that obligation within the consortium.
Right.
So,
Yeah, thank you.
okay. Other questions? Unrelated questions?
We have one other question. When we were talking about trying to put together shared degree programs, we had some discussion about whether these should be dual or joint. Could you clarify that?
The question is going to clarify dual or joint, and they may, you might have a situation where they're neither. Our definition of a dual degree says the person actually gets a credential from two schools. And that's most common in cases where it's fairly common in international exchanges, especially, say, if you have a 2-2 exchange or something like that for a program where the institution, upon completion of the American studies, gets a degree from the American institution and gets the same degree from the foreign institution. That's sort of a typical dual degree program. Another kind of dual degree program, actually we used to have dual degree programs at my institution, and some of y'all probably have this as well, say in engineering or something like that, where a student would complete 3 years at our institution and then transfer to Auburn or someplace else and earn an engineering degree after another, actually engineering usually takes 5 years, another 2 years of study, they would get an engineering degree from Auburn. Auburn would basically transfer 3 years worth of our credits into their degree and grant the degree. And we basically would transfer back, we'd make an exception to our residency requirement in effect and transfer back the degrees from the engineering program. And the person would get a degree from us, I think in mathematics or something like that. And so they got 2 degrees for the same work to a large extent. That kind of dual degree, I think, does fall under the standard because it's a little bit more than an articulation agreement since 2 degrees are being awarded, but it's pretty straightforward. And it just requires notification and that kind of a case. A joint degree is where you've got 2 institutions' name on the diploma itself. So the degree is actually granted by more than one institution at the same time. And I would just say there are specifics on that in the collaborative academic arrangements policy. My understanding, what you're talking about is the students collecting a lot of credits from lots of places, and you're finding a pathway where they can get a credential. So it's neither a dual degree nor a joint degree. It is a degree, and it's being done partly through consortium and partly through transfer of credit. So the part of this policy that pertains only to dual degrees and joint degrees would not apply, I think, for what y'all are talking about. It would only be the things that pertain to consortiums in general that would apply. Is that? Well, it's got to be a degree, and it's got to be granted by an institution because the system doesn't have degree granting authority as an institution. So it's a degree of the institution whose name appears on the degree. And so the standard would apply to that institution.
Well, I guess this is where I'm still confused. When you named earlier home and host, if what I think Sandra's talking about, that her institution would be the home and the other institution would be the host, that is sort of what you're describing, but you're saying that would not be either dual degree. It
would not be a dual degree. But also the 25%, if we're talking about an undergraduate degree, what I'm saying is just being the home for 25% of the degree does not meet the standard. Unless you're also showing that you've got control in some way, either through having an adjunct faculty a relationship that exists for that, even though the faculty member is at another institution in the system 200 miles away. For the purposes of this particular offering of this particular course, you also are serving as a institution who is hiring that faculty member in delivery, and you're making sure the course is well delivered. If it's badly delivered, you're probably not going to invite that faculty member back to deliver to your students again. You know, you're putting safeguards in place to serve as not just the home institution, but picking up some of the role of the host. Not necessarily all of it, but some of the role of the host to give you sufficient oversight in that case. Yes.
Just a quick question. I mean, I think I know this, but CLEP exams, things of that sort are transfer. However, if you do a credit by exam at your institution, that's considered an institutional credit, correct? So that can be part of your 25%.
No.
Cannot, okay.
No. I don't think that would be viewed as, that would be viewed as It may be institutional credit, but it's not part of the credits earned at your institution. And I think that that wording is actually in the standard. Let me go back to it again. Through instruction offered by the institution. And if you're clapping credits, you're giving credit by examination, non-credit to credit, yes, they're on your transcript, but the instruction was not offered by your institution.
Thank you.
Okay. And we certainly encourage those other ways of earning credit. That's not a problem. Yes, ma'am.
I think the new degree that we're trying to formulate for the BS in organizational leadership, if your institution, okay, if in a major area of your junior senior year, most of it, you do at your home institution, but then you determine after speaking with the student that their concentration could be defined at another institution, you have to use that as, that, you can't count that as 25% of what you're saying, but would that still, since you took on the, I'm saying the shell of the major, not necessarily the concentration courses, would that still leave with the home institution, or would it be better to tell your student to transfer?
I think if you're not going to be able to, if the other institution is offering 25%, and you would normally just be bringing that back and giving the degree, but they're actually offering 25% or more of the degree, and you're not, then under this standard, it would be better for the degree to be offered by the other institution, if I'm hearing your question correctly. I'm sorry?
Even though you've done 75%?
No, if you've done 75%, you're...
That last piece, that would be the concentration.
No, it doesn't say the last 25%. It doesn't say the first 25%. It just says 25%. So it's not a residency requirement. It's strictly saying it's a saying that a certain fraction of the degree needs to have originated from the school that grants it, or else there is no control over the granting of that degree. Outside of the except what is outside of the institution. The institution doesn't have sufficient control over the granting of that degree. Just 25%, doesn't matter where it is. It's not, again, not a residency requirement. So it could be gen ed, which is kind of odd. I mean, you would think it would be the major that you would have the most concern about, but that's not the way the standard reads. Okay, others?
Yes, I had one question. If we're looking at a consortium here, and when we talk about, within this consortium, can't hear me. Is this better?
Yes.
Okay. When we're looking at the establishment of a consortium, you talked about having an understanding of faculty credentials, and you talked about somewhere they had a really good example where the articulation or the partnerships had their faculty credentials online where VPAAs at some point in time could look at that. Is that something you would recommend for a consortium of the type we are trying to establish here, or?
It's a good question. I think you have to find your own model that works. I'm not endorsing that model or not unendorsing that model. But it is one means whereby if your goal is to be able to declare that course as your own course, it says you've got to transcript it based on who taught it. And if you want to say, I taught it, and by the way, the advantage of doing that, of course, is it's a whole lot easier to do your math to determine if you've hit 25% or not. If you want to say, I taught it, then you need to have some mechanism in place that is similar to that. Not necessarily that exact mechanism, but something that says that we can pre-approve the instructor. We can exercise some control in the sense that we have an obligation to evaluate the instructor. And that perhaps, again, if the course is going south in the middle of the course, you have a means to intervene and be able to address that because it's your student. and you're concerned about the quality of the instruction that your student is getting, and you're treating it not as transfer. You have that obligation with transfer, but it's of a lesser level to some extent. Transfer is well accepted, but there's no way you can go back with transfer of credit and exert that kind of control. So we're saying you need a little bit more control for at least 25% of the coursework. You know, because in the extreme, what y'all are modeling, I think, if I'm hearing this correctly, is a circumstance where one of the System of Georgia degree granting institutions could very well be granting a degree for a student who never took a course from that institution. Potentially. And what we're saying is, you can't do that. I mean, they took it from somewhere, and it would be better to identify where they, you know, make that student the responsibility of the school that taught the preponderance of the courses, you know, kind of a thing, if it's 25%. But why, how can you ensure the integrity of the degree as an institution if you had no control over any of the coursework that the student took? That's the dilemma, I think, that you're facing here.
I think it sort of depends on the model, because I've seen multiple. I've seen some that work and some that don't.
Right.
And absolutely what you're describing, where the affiliates, the partners in the consortium don't have input, don't share information, that doesn't work. But for a group, a consortium or collaborative where the coursework was developed as a group, approved at all of the USG schools as equivalent. Okay, so English 1101 equals English 1101 on campus at any USG school, where they do have a subcommittee to look over the evaluations, where the evaluations are shared with each of the affiliate institutions and made public via our fact book. Some of the credentials are in our fact book for all, but we probably need to do a better job of that. I think that is a much better model and really what you are looking for. So when you say, okay, did the course originate there? Well, Dalton may not have hired the instructor, okay, but they saw the syllabus, they saw the course, they approved it as equivalent, they get the assessments at the end of the term, they get the retention rates, the grade distributions. They get far more information from the courses within our program than they may get from courses, and I don't want to pick on Dalton. Okay, I'll say West Georgia. I'll use my own school. The level of detail and oversight that is part of this particular consortium or collaborative is far greater than what we hold our other programs to, quite frankly. So.
And we're saying you can do that for 75% of the coursework in the degree. I mean, I don't know what else to tell you. I didn't write the standard. I mean, I'm just telling you what the standard is.
Help me out, Mike.
I see our problem as actually far deeper in that we have, within the consortium, often been talking about the consortium's oversight of the student demonstrating college-level competency and having met the assessments appropriately. So we've gone past the delivery of instruction and been talking a lot about how do we make sure that the assessment of the student learning is in the purview of the faculty. And so we have, on some campuses that have done prior learning assessment, a portfolio or of demonstrated competency in a lab kind of setup, considered those credits because they were assessed and transcripted by our faculty on that campus as courses in residency, courses that met the 25%. And what is clear from your comments is that the SACS definition is only on delivery
I think that may be, I don't know if y'all heard the statement. The statement says that you've gone beyond looking at just at the delivery of instruction. You've looked at the delivery of the program in a broader sense, a close collaboration on exactly what goes into the degree, and a lot of other collaborative activities taking place across all the institutions. And that looks like the SACS standard is only looking at the delivery of the specific course. I think that there may be room for you to make that kind of a case, but it's up to a committee to make that decision and not me. Or it's up to the executive council to make a ruling or something like that, because all I can go by is what's printed, and that's what I've relayed to you. I will tell you of two kinds of circumstances, and maybe you're raising a third. It's not there yet, because it's not printed as a policy. We have two policies where there are explicit ways to have exceptions to the wording, or an alternative approach, I think, is used for those policies. One is the standard numbers, is 2.7.4, and this is a policy that says that at your institution, at each degree level at which you're authorized to offer a degree. So if you're an institution that offers some master's programs and baccalaureate programs and associate degree programs, that would be at each one of those three levels. That for at least one degree offered at your institution, you offer 100% of the coursework needed to earn that degree. So there is at least one associate's degree you could identify where a student could start with you and finish with you and earn the degree. There's one bachelor's degree where that's true. There's one master's degree where that's true. That's a standard. That's a requirement that we have within the principles, which would speak to the separately accredited online institution, by the way. They would have to meet that policy as well. The exception to that exists in the case of, well, I'm pretty sure it exists within the system right now. It won't in the future. The Georgia State Health Science Center, I don't know if that's right or not. It used to be Medical College of Georgia. Probably did not meet that standard, because my guess is they offer some bachelor's degrees, but they do not offer the gen ed coursework needed to earn that bachelor's degree. So they violate that standard. We have a policy statement which calls for the way that an institution may have an exception to that policy. It's an alternative approach to meeting it. Okay, that's out there. That exists for that standard. There's another standard that says, and again, I don't remember the number, it's 2.3, I think, that says that the chief executive officer of the institution has a chief executive officer whose primary responsibility is to the institution and who is not the presiding officer of the board. Well, we don't make any exception to the presiding officer of the board thing. But to this, who is primary responsibility is to the institution, we have some institutions in membership that are part of systems. And the system chancellor or president, the head of the system's president in some states, chancellor in other states, is also the president or chancellor, depending on the state, of one of the institutions within that state, often the flagship institution. It's a violation of that standard, because that person's primary responsibility is clearly divided between the system and the institution. So there are ways in which there can be an exception made to that standard by policy. It says, and within the principles, it says, see Commission Policy, Core Requirement 2.3, documenting an alternate approach. You know, I don't have the authority to do this. I probably don't have the authority to suggest it, but here we go, and I'm on tape. You know, maybe this is a standard where there's room for an alternate approach, a means to be able to document because of the level of control that you're talking about. I think that would be something that at a minimum would be mandated, that there would be clear enough level of control to be able to have an alternate approach to meet the policy statement, or to have a revision to the policy statement which adds in a section called an alternate approach. You know, in certain exceptional situations, it may be that, you know, kind of a thing. I don't know. That doesn't exist now, however, and that may be a means to explore. But I am just telling you right now, the standard is what the standard is.
We're new to the consortium, so I apologize if this is really an obvious question to others, but we're still trying to figure out the whole PLA thing. And from what I understand you were saying about CLEP and other programs, you were saying that the credit awarded can't count towards the 25% because it's not instruction delivered at the institution. And I think portfolios came up. My understanding is that the portfolio process, the way the consortium is doing it, when we consortium in college, is a pretty in-depth, on-campus institutional process where the student has to take PLA 2,000 per semester, then they work with an assessor for a semester, and there's a lot of institutional control, interaction, rebuilding of learning that goes on. It's not just documenting what learning came on in the past, but it's an effort to sort of renew that learning in the process. And so in that context, is there wiggle room with you all, or will they make a case?
I hear the question. Let me repeat it. The question is, okay, let's look at portfolio process where there's a lot of institutional work that goes into determining the credit that goes along with the petition for portfolio credit. No, a lot of student work and institutional work, both, that goes on in the case of portfolios. Could that be viewed as part of the 25% offered by the institution? I think that's a determination that's going to have to be made by our committees and or by our executive council at some point. I think it's a good question. My gut reaction is that they would probably say no, that it's not going to count that way. And the reason I'm saying that is because it's covered under specific standards that are akin to transfer of credit standards. Our transfer of credit standard 344 says the institution publishes policies that include criteria for evaluating, awarding, and accepting credit for transfer, experiential learning, credit by examination, advanced placement, and professional certificates that is consistent, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And here's the part that all that work you're talking about does. The institution assumes responsibility for the academic quality of any coursework or credit recorded on the transcript. So they're doing due diligence to ensure the academic quality of what's being recorded on the transcript, and the student is likewise. And then there's a separate policy that says the institution awards academic credit for coursework taken on a non-credit basis only when there's documentation that the non-credit coursework is equivalent to a designated credit experience. So if I'm coming in and I have a real estate license, and I went to a lot of trouble, and I went to a school that offers licensure coursework, and I took that coursework, and I went and studied, and I passed my license, and I've been practicing for 3 years in real estate, and I've closed on 20 houses, and I've learned a whole lot of business law in that process. And so I do a portfolio, and I'm seeking credit for 2 courses you offer. I'm seeking credit for Principles of Real Estate, you know, Finance 302 or something, and then I'm seeking credit perhaps for a course on the mortgage process as part of a real estate program, Finance 316. The fact is, you have not taught me Finance 316 and Finance 302. You've evaluated my portfolio and deemed it to be equivalent to those courses. So I don't think that they would accept that as part of the 25%. But it's a good question. It's a really good question, and I think a very fair one to ask, and it's the kind of thing that would need some clarification.
I think it depends on how you define learning.
But remember, I don't define this. Our committees define this.
Your committee is looking at us whether or not we're reconstructing learning or whether we're just recording learning.
Now, I understand what you're saying, and I think it's a real good point. I don't know how a committee would respond to that.
I'm kneeling here. For lots of reasons.
Yeah, why don't you all stand up and then sit back down at least? You know, that would help a little bit. That would.
We have in the room with us Catherine Marino, who is one of 3 authors of a document called Assessing Prior Learning. I didn't formulate my question perhaps as well as I thought, but there is within the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning, as you were kind of the Vice President for Higher Ed, who's also in the room with us today. A different viewpoint on what are legitimate ways of assessing and determining prior learning. So this discussion, just FYI, is an effort to reformulate and reconstitute our thinking as we move forward, but clearly our thinking has been on our role and the role of the faculty as determining whether college level learning has been gained in a setting other than a classroom, i.e. delivery of instruction. And that has been what's been guiding for almost a decade.
When I add, there's a really important assumption that's built into assessing learning, which is that assessment, that it's integral to the learning process itself and feedback. So there's very few cases where the student just brings in experience or documents and credit is granted. It's a feedback process. It's multiple groups. What you said very, very nicely about a reconstruction. So it's really a different adding to the instruction in a different way. So it may be that we need to find different ways to talk about the assessment of prior learning, because it's really a wonderful mix of prior, current, and extension into new learning. So semantics may be a problem right now.
And I think it is a good question. You know, I think of independent study, for example. You know, independent study is going to be viewed as credit offered by the institution. I don't think there's any question about that. It would be viewed that way.
And I just add, in the institution where I am, we have, instead of talking about prior learning, we talk about independent learning, which would include prior learning assessment, because we wanted to put the emphasis on that there's ongoing instruction of some kind involved. So do you think that, as we think about how do we communicate, how do we articulate what it is that's really going on?
Yeah. My answer, though, in terms of what I think, is that I think that we're dealing with a standard that has been in print now for a month, has been passed now for closer to 3. So we don't have a track record of how this standard is being interpreted right now, and won't know how it's being interpreted until it gets interpreted a few times. That's the way the peer review process tends to work. You don't know until the peers start speaking exactly what they're going to say.
And without being arrogant, we don't seem to have any peers. I mean, we seem to be, we're none of the above. We're neither joint nor dual. We're neither this nor that. And so how do we educate those who are going to be our jury of our peers when we're doing something so out of the box, if you will? Judy?
Yes,
Oh, thank you. I was just going to say, it seems to me that's really the problem. If we don't know until a few examples come up, how does one prepare for those examples and being able to move forward from them?
Yeah, and I think that's why I'm here, is to try to offer my advice, at least, in terms of what I see as the pitfalls, at least, as you move forward, because the wording has changed, and it was changed explicitly from a circumstance which allowed for all the credits earned within the consortium to count toward those thresholds to one where it clearly does not anymore. And so it does have bearing, I think, on what y'all are trying to do here. And you know, it may call for the need to have an explicit exception or something that's, they will not pass an exception for Georgia. I know y'all have no peers, but that's not the way we operate. But you know, it is the kind of thing that if a case could be made, that's why we have an executive council and a 77-member commission is to do that. And this was voted on, by the way, by the College Delegate Assembly, by y'all. And there was no discussion, by the way, when it was voted on. And every institution in this room had an institution representative on that, who was eligible to vote, your president, and that was delegated sometimes by the president to someone else. So just to pass that along, there was no discussion at all on this.
And actually, I still see the demarcation, because when we're talking about the 25%, you're talking about, again, instruction at university, prior learning. If you don't look at the title, it's prior learning. And I know we want to talk about, well, there may be some ongoing learning, especially with portfolios. And understand, I agree with that. But I really do see a demarcation in what that standard says versus how we're going to be able to document prior learning at our own institution as being equivalent. To me, that's two different things.
Yeah, but documenting prior learning is something that has quite a history behind it and has been done successfully by a lot of people and been done very well by some people. Been done very poorly by some people too, and you know, it's important to do it well. But I gee, that wasn't a tomato, thank you.
I just, I think this is a challenge for us, particularly as we get pushed more and more to increase our performance in retention, progression, and graduation. And we're looking at alternative ways that we can help people who can't just come be on our campus all the time. So it seems like folks are working a little bit at cross purposes to push us to say, be out of the box and be innovative. And then when we try to do that, to say, oh, you got out of the box, we're not going to let you do that anymore. So I guess it's just, you know. And
I think the key thing is that y'all are able to establish that it's done with quality and integrity, and that it's going to be, the graduates are going to be people who are appropriately graduated. But be aware that we live in a society where not every institution all the time does that. Otherwise, we wouldn't need peer review committees. You could just submit your materials to us and we'd read through them and say, that's great. But unfortunately, again, read the national press and you will see that even good intentions sometimes end up with bad results, and that's why we have committees that go to your campuses and ask what y'all probably think are the same question 50 times and over and over and over again. So,
Can we thank Dr. Johnson for being with us today?
thank you.